Hey guys, it's Sylviaworsham. Welcome to Mindful Mondays and welcome to this special edition of Grit, Generosity, and Grace Under Fire, the three lessons my father modeled to me. And yesterday was Mother's Day, but it was also my dad's 81st birthday. And this is the reason for the video today. Aside from these two very special events where I celebrated my two heroes, my dad and my mom, I also celebrated my daughter's near win for her race yesterday. And my daughter 2 weeks ago, as I posted on all my social media channels, had this fear of not running the race because she didn't want to finish last. And after that, I kind of sat her down and in true Villalobos grit style, kind of said, you've got a lot of grit and perseverance in your own blood. And my mom modeled grit, but my dad especially modeled grit throughout our lives. And he came from a really abusive home. And despite all the obstacles that he faced, he still became a doctor and came to the United States to finish his medical training, despite not knowing English, having to learn English, on a crash course for a year, takes the exam, loses the chance or the opportunity to come to the United States because of missing one question, goes back and redoes the test, but that takes another 6 months to get to its dream. That's grit. But more importantly, I was teaching my daughter grit yesterday during her race because after they raced, and she came in fourth, by the way, out of 15 girls, the parents raced. Now, I'm not in the physical fit condition I was in January of 2020, where I ran a half marathon in 2 hours and 38 minutes. I just don't have that physical fitness anymore. And even 1 mile is going to knock me on my behind. And that it did. And I wanted to quit the mile run that the parents were running, but I wanted to show my daughter and model to her the Villalobos grit. The grit my father modeled to me in 2003 when he was, they did surgery to remove a brain tumor. He had an ischemic stroke and it paralyzed him completely. And here's an independent, highly successful man whose professional life was cut short, basically, that despite he came back to work within 6 months of having a stroke, of losing total ability to move, came back to work at a limited basis and did not retire for another 4 years. That level of grit is what I call the Villalobos grit, and that's my maiden name. He modeled that to us repeatedly, and no matter what obstacle came at you, you had grit, you had perseverance, and you could just face your fears and work through it. And let me tell you, I'm so happy that I was able to push through my own fear and my own fear of failure of like, oh my gosh, it's gonna knock me on my behind to run this mile in front of my child. And no matter how hot and humid it was yesterday, and it was hot and humid, I ran that race and I gave it my all. And at the end, I couldn't even breathe. But I wanted to show my girl that no matter what life throws at you, you don't quit. You don't give in. You have grit and you keep going. If that is your dream and that's what you want to do, you keep going because you're made of grit. It runs in your blood. It is part of your DNA and you got it in you. And that's exactly what I modeled to my daughter. I finished that race. I was hyperventilating. I sat on the floor, but I finished it. My dad came back to work within 6 months of having a stroke. What excuse did I have to not finish a race? I mean, come on. So that's grit. That is lesson one. My dad, coming from an abusive home, was also very lucky in that his maternal aunt, who was a very generous single woman, by the way, she was known as La Muñeca, the doll, translated. She's the person that I consider my grandmother because she raised them. And she was a very generous, golden heart person who modeled it to him. And he, in turn, when I was a kid and we'd go to charity events, he'd be the first one like putting his name on those tables, like the auction tables. And I'd be like, Dad, what are you doing? And he's like, somebody has to give. Nobody's giving here, but he goes, I'm blessed and I want to give back and I want to help these charities. I was in medical sales when my dad retired from medicine in 2007. I used to work in hospitals for Pfizer Pharmaceuticals. I had countless nurses and patients of his come up to me and say, your dad did my surgery for free, did not charge me. So do you imagine back in those days? I mean, he took his oath to a very high level degree. His standard was unlike any other I've seen before. He took it seriously to do by the patient first. He would do the surgery, and sometimes he wouldn't get paid at all. And sometimes he'd be paid in tamales, or he'd be paid in pigs, or whatever the people could afford, the humble people could afford, because he was a urologist, and so some of these surgeries were really expensive. Now, the hospital would charge their money because they're hospitals and their businesses, but my father, as the surgeon who did all of the work, who admitted the patient, who did the follow-up office visits, did not charge them because they could not pay. That's generosity. He put my brother and sister through medical school. Generosity. Put me through school. He offered to put me through law school. I didn't want to go to law school. I didn't want to be a lawyer. No offense to all the lawyers listening. I just didn't want to be a lawyer. But he was generous, and he continued throughout his life to be that generous. And I have taught the same level of generosity to my children. My little boy, when he sees somebody that's suffering, he wants to give. And that's important. It's important to model our children the beautiful lessons that were taught to us, because you know what? Not everything is negative in life, guys. When you operate from fear and you operate from scarcity, you're going to see it everywhere, and you're going to blame your parents and blame whoever's near you and whoever you love and who is closest to you. But once you work through that fear and that anger and that resentment, you will see the joy and the happiness underneath those layers of your victimhood, and they will emerge, and you will see a whole new life that you had never seen before. Everything will look so vibrant and bright to you, and the memories that are hidden deeply into your subconscious mind are there. But they're there under so many layers of anger and resentment and fear, and you got to work through it to get to the side of it. Generosity was just something my father did. And the last lesson is grace under fire. My dad was chairman of the board for many years before his brain tumor and ischemic stroke and everything that followed afterwards. And he held very big roles. And as such, you came under fire a lot, especially in hospital systems, because you were the person to blame if things didn't go people's way. And one of the lessons my dad always taught me was, no matter what people do to you, you always do the right thing. Always. It doesn't matter how hard it is, you do the right thing, and people will come at you with a ton of fire. First and foremost, take ownership for your role in it. Take ownership for it. Be a right person. Be a man, be a woman of honor. And above all, be graceful. Be graceful in defeat. Be graceful under fire. Well, there's an instance that I wanted to share with you. My dad, as chairman of the board, was approached by the hospital wanting to fire a colleague of his who had gotten into a violent altercation with another physician. And they had had it with this doctor because it had been several instances. But because my dad was chairman of the board at the time, he was the one that was in those committees. And so what my dad told the hospital system was, let me form a committee of his colleagues and let them vote either way. And that he was doing, he was coming up with a neutral committee, people that he knew would be honest and truthful and would serve the objective at hand. And that's what he needed. Well, one of his friends, who was also very good friends with the doctor in question, wanted to be on the committee and pressured my dad to be put on the committee. And my father, being a man of his word, of integrity, which is his number one value, which, by the way, is my number one value, he said no, because he knew what the hospital was going to do. He knew that if he put this doctor on the committee, the doctor in question would lose his job, and he didn't want that. He wanted his colleague to get a second chance or a third chance or whatever chance this was for him, because he had mouths to feed. He had a family. My father he knew that. Well, this doctor went on a campaign to smear my father. He smeared my father's name, called him names, And my father held his ground with grace and with dignity, and a standard I've yet to see in others, honestly. And this friend stopped talking to him for 10, maybe 15 years. And even after he stopped talking to him, my father never discussed what had transpired with this other doctor, did not bash this other doctor. He stayed quiet, and the outcome was very favorable to the doctor that had been involved in the altercation. It was extremely favorable. He got to keep his job. And my dad, the lesson he taught me was, no matter how hard they come at you, never lose your temper. The first person that loses their temper loses the game. And I never forgot that. It's like a chess match, he said. You're anticipating their moves. You know how they're going to move. You got to anticipate their moves. So be prepared and be graceful and take ownership and do the right thing. Well, it came in handy in my career in pharmaceuticals, because when I started my career, it was back in 1997. And Roche Pharmaceuticals, I was an eager beaver, and I had so much to prove, and I wanted to achieve, to be happy in those years. And I had drive, like insatiable drive. I was an achiever. And it really rubbed my two partners the wrong way. And they felt like I was, I don't know what the word is. There's a word I'm thinking of in Spanish, but in English, it's just not coming to me. But the word is basically, I was making them look bad. And they didn't like that. So they created this drama with the managers, and they called a meeting. And my father sat me down and said, they're going to come at you hard. Do the right thing. Take ownership for your role in it. But under no circumstances, do not give in to their emotions. Stay neutral and logical and graceful under fire. I did not lose my temper. They actually lost their temper. And then the managers actually saw their true colors, the true motivation behind the meeting, which was to just put me down because they felt threatened, especially the woman that was leading the charge. And it was a super great lesson I had learned from my dad, to be graceful under fire. And it's something that can be applied in business every day, because you will have emotional altercations with people. And it's up to you to stay logical and neutral and graceful under fire. I'm Sylviaworsham, your host of Mindful Mondays. Thank you so much for tuning in to this special celebratory edition of Grit, Generosity, and Grace Under Fire. 3 lessons my father taught me. Please, please, please stay safe. Love y'all. Bye now.